Okay. And I am really pleased to turn it over to Jim Turk, who's one of the leaders in our Wisconsin Disability Vote Coalition and helped to get this session organized. So Jim, why don't you give us a few words before we get going?
All right, guys. Thank you for joining us. I'm Jim Turk. So some of you may not know me. I spread the word far and wide, but I also spread it to other people and said, you spread the word far and wide as well. So it's very possible that people don't know who I am, which is fine. I'm Jim Turk, a volunteer with the MS Society. And I just wanted people to get out and vote. And I knew that there was a lot going on in the state legislature with voting like drop boxes, who ballot harvesting, stuff like that, and absentee voting, all of which Barbara's going to talk about. And so we're gonna handle that stuff and try to clear that up as much as possible. So again, just thanks for joining, and make sure you get out and vote this November. Go ahead, Barb.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jim. It's so great to work with you in the Disability Vote Coalition, and thanks for your help turning people out for today. So again, for those of you who joined us late, I'm Barbara Beckert with Disability Rights Wisconsin and the Disability Vote Coalition, and along with one of our other coalition members, Martha Chambers, we will be talking with you today about getting ready for the November 8th election. So before we get started, just a few housekeeping things. We'll be showing a PowerPoint today, and you will receive a copy of that afterwards. But if you have comments or questions, please feel free to put those in the chat. We ask if everyone can please stay muted while we're doing the PowerPoint, just because background noises can be an issue sometimes. And we are very fortunate to have an ASL interpreter here today. So if anyone needs to be able to multi-pin to use the interpreter, please just put a note in the chat, and I am happy to assist you with that. So any logistical questions before we get started? Nope. All right, well, I do have a question for you before we get started. I wondered if people are planning to vote absentee or to vote in person. And you can just put that in the chat, or if using the chat is a hassle for you, feel free to just speak up and let me know, just trying to get a sense of the audience. So I see in person, absentee, responses are starting to come in. Okay, great. Already cast my ballot absentee. Well, that's a prepared voter. All right.
So Barb, can I just interrupt real quick once, and
Sure.
I'll stop, I promise. I was just going to say that, so after I had never used absentee at all, and then I went to we had a big thing on the at the city county building, and I tried the machine, and boy, was it easy. And then I posted something on Facebook, a reminder this morning on Facebook, and a friend of mine who doesn't live too far from me, but he's a elections official, said he wishes everybody would vote on the machines because the machines are so easy. So maybe you're doing it absentee, and that's fine. But if you're not, if you go in, remember that there's those, and Barb will talk about them, but we have those kiosks where you can on the computer, just a touch screen, and it's very accessible, very easy to use, very clear. So that might change people's minds.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jim. So Jim is referring to the requirement in federal law that every polling place have what's referred to as an accessible voting machine, so people with disabilities can vote privately and independently. And we will talk more about that as we get into the meat of our presentation today. So thanks, everyone. It actually looks like we have kind of a mix in terms of in-person versus absentee. So we'll be covering both, and we've got a lot on the plate. So let's dive in, and I'll stop from time to time to see if there are questions. So I'm going to share my screen so folks can see the PowerPoint. Hope that's up there for everyone. Okay. So Just a quick background about the Disability Vote Coalition. So we welcome all of you to join us in our work to ensure that as many voters with disabilities as possible are registered to vote, cast a ballot, understand, and assert their rights. Disability Rights Wisconsin and the Board for People with Developmental Disabilities team up to coordinate the coalition. We have organizations from all over Wisconsin and also a lot of great individuals who care about this. So join us. We'd love to have you participate in our monthly meetings and to help be a part of this movement. I've got our website up, disabilityvote.org. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And in addition, Disability Rights Wisconsin has a voter hotline, which I'll mention several times today, which I help to staff. And we're here for you all year round, not only on election day. So why is this election so important? There are a number of offices that will be elected: governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, secretary of state, state treasurer, US senator. That just happens every 6 years. So that's very important. Each of us will vote for a congressional representative. State senator. Now, if you live in an odd number district, your state senator is up. I'm in an even number district. Senator Darling's my senator, so she's not up this time. Everyone will vote for their assembly representative. And depending where you live, you might vote for sheriff or other county offices. So as a result of this election, the control of the US Senate and the House will be determined. In addition, there will be major changes in our state legislature. This is really historic. So many people are going to be transitioning out of the legislature. 30 of them are either retiring or not seeking re-election or running for another office. We are seeing that there will be 7 state senators who are moving on. So a lot of new state senators for those of us who do policy work to get to know. In addition, almost a third of the assembly representatives will be new. As a result, we expect to see changes in leadership and committee chairs. We're losing a lot of experienced members. And whatever is important to you as a voter, long-term care, mental health, transportation, housing, social security, voting rights, special education, housing, these folks will be making very important decisions and they will have a lot to learn about these areas. So make sure that you do your homework and make an informed vote in the election. So who's eligible to vote? If you're a US citizen, 18 or older on election day, a resident of Wisconsin, and you must have lived at your registration address for 28 days prior to the election. If you have a criminal conviction, and you must have completed your sentence, and that means also parole and probation, so no longer be on paper, then you are eligible to vote again. And finally, if you have not been determined by a court to be ineligible to vote, and in the disability world, sometimes people are under guardianship and have lost their right to vote. We'll talk a little more about that later. So I'm really glad we're having this training today, and thanks again to Jim for pushing for this, because this is a really important time. The clock is ticking with this election. So the deadline to register online or by mail is October 19th. So I would encourage all of you, and if you support others, the voters you work with or the residents you work with, depending on people are living in a congregate setting or in the community, have people check their voter registration. And that's easy to do at myvote.gov. That's something that we'll talk a little bit more about today. People can also call our hotline and we'll give them a hand. If people have not registered by mail or online by October 19th, the good news is there's still an opportunity to do so. People can register in person at their clerk's office through November 4th, or at their polling place on November 8th. So this is where you check the registration. You go to the MyVote website, myvote.wi.gov. Make sure to remember that address. It's a good one. And you just click register to vote, enter your first and last name and date of birth, and then you search to see if you're registered. And as I said, we help voters with this on a pretty frequent basis. So if the voter has moved, they may need to re-register and update their information. It's depending on the situation. Sometimes that can be done online. But again, you want to get that done by October 19th, or you'll have to follow up with your clerk or at your polling place. So if you're registering for the first time, or if you're re-registering, if you haven't voted in 4 years, you'll probably need to re-register. You need, if you're doing it online, the best thing to do is to have either your Wisconsin driver's license or Wisconsin ID card from the state that will allow you to complete the registration process online. If you don't have those, you can still register to vote, but you'll want to use the paper form. You need to provide an acceptable proof of residence, different than photo ID, as well as either your ID number or the last 4 digits of your social security number if you don't have a Wisconsin ID. Since so many people with disabilities don't drive, we often hear from people they don't have a driver's license and they may not have a state DMV ID card. It's still possible to register to vote, so that's an important clarification. Proof of residence, however, is required to register to vote. So these are some of the things that are used. Again, if you have that driver's license or ID card, it's easy. If you don't, you might have a utility bill, a paycheck. Again, we help a lot of people who don't have those things. So what we often see as useful is an intake document from a group home, nursing home, or assisted living facility that has the voter's name and the facility address on it. So that's one thing you can use for proof of residence. And you can use any letter from a government agency that has the name and the voting address on it. People can also use a university ID card. I recently got a call from a high school teacher who was helping a student with a disability, and I was able to tell her she could use the student's report card for proof of residence because it has the address on it. So I thought that was kind of a cool example. Don't run across that as often. And here are some pictures of the acceptable proof of residence documents. And again, we'll send this PowerPoint out to you afterwards, and this is also on our Disability Vote website. Photo ID requirements. Wisconsin has one of the most restrictive photo ID laws in the country, so it's important to understand what's required. Your photo ID, by the way, does not have to have a current address. You only prove your address when registering. So if you have a state ID and you've moved since then, you can still use it when you go to vote as photo ID. bringit.wi.gov is a great website, so we recommend that if you want more details about photo ID. Here's a picture of the most common forms. So aside from the state ID and driver's license, some of the other forms are a passport, veteran affairs card, certificate of naturalization, tribal ID, or student ID. Those are other helpful things, but again, most of the callers who contact us who don't have that state ID don't have these other things either. So the lack of photo ID can be challenging for some voters with disabilities. So is there anyone who doesn't need to provide a photo ID? There are a few categories, and we'll talk a little bit more today about what an indefinitely confined voter is. So hold that thought, I will come back to that. Voters who are in a special care facility, such as a nursing home, if they don't have a valid photo ID, then the signatures of the staff of the special voting deputies who conduct voting in care facilities satisfies the photo ID requirement. Confidential electors, this is usually someone who's been the victim of domestic violence. They are exempt. And active military and permanent overseas voters are not required to provide photo ID. So If someone does not have acceptable photo ID, how to get a state ID. The gateway to getting a state ID is our Department of Motor Vehicles. So we've listed the hotline for you. There's a website where you can find the service center near you. And when you go to the DMV, you want to do your homework, talk to them on the hotline. They'll tell you what documents you need to bring. But I want people to be aware that if you don't have those documents, a birth certificate, for example, sometimes people don't have that handy. It may take them time to get it. You can still get a photo ID for voting. They have a process called IDPP, the ID petition process. And that helps people who maybe don't have those documents on hand but want to vote. And DMV is actually supposed to help people get those documents. So if you need help with getting that photo ID, please give us a call. There are some groups, advocacy groups that specialize in that we can connect you to. Let's see. Yeah. Wisconsin Voter ID Coalition is one of them. Vote Riders is another. Okay, I'm going to just pause for a minute here. Stop share. Any questions with what we've covered so far? We're going to transition now to absentee voting, but just want to catch the questions as they come up. All right, good. Well, we're covering a lot, so want to make sure that we give you an opportunity for questions. I will go back to the section about absentee voting, which, judging by this group, is something a lot of people may be interested in. All right, we find that a really significant number of people with disabilities and older adults choose to vote absentee. People may not have transportation. They may feel more comfortable voting absentee because they may not always feel well, or it may be difficult for them to get out of their house because of their disability or health condition. So Wisconsin has a no excuses absentee voting law. What that means is that any voter can vote absentee in our state. You don't have to qualify for absentee voting, as is the case in some states. And any voter can request absentee ballots for the year. I always vote absentee in recent years because I have to do a lot of work on election day because of my job. So I request absentee ballots for the entire year. And you can do that too when it's time for the new year. So if you want to vote absentee and you don't have a request on file yet, do not delay. You want to ask as soon as possible, get that request in. You can request on the My Vote Wisconsin website, which we looked at earlier. You can request it by mail or at your municipal clerk's office. Get to know your clerk. Each community has a municipal clerk who administers elections, and they can be very helpful in answering your voting questions. If you have your absentee ballot, it comes with an instruction sheet. Follow those instructions carefully. There have been some changes, which we'll talk about a little later. If you need assistance completing your ballot, you are by law allowed to have assistance from a person of your choice, as long as they're not your employer or union representative. When you vote absentee, you need a witness. We'll talk more about that as well. And you want to complete and return that ballot in plenty of time so your vote counts. The US mail is a little unpredictable these days, so allow a minimum of a week if you are mailing it. One thing that's really cool that people don't always know about is you're able to check the status of your absentee ballot online. So once again, I feel like I'm doing a commercial for My Vote Wisconsin. If you go to that website and check the status of your absentee ballot, it will tell you, has the ballot been mailed to you yet? And if you have mailed your ballot, it will let you know whether or not the ballot has been received at the other end by your clerk. So that gives a lot of people peace of mind when they can see on there that their ballot has been received. So if you always need to vote absentee, I mentioned before that Wisconsin has a status called indefinitely confined voters. So that's really important to a lot of people with disabilities, and the term is a little confusing to people. So I wanted to explain it. If a voter has a hard time getting to the polls on election day due to age, illness, infirmity, or disability, and they always want to vote absentee for that reason, then they can certify that they are an indefinitely confined voter and that they want to receive absentee ballots for every election. So you certify that you're confined because of age, illness, infirmity, or disability. It doesn't mean that you can't leave your home. It means you have difficulty getting out to vote because of those reasons. So indefinitely confined voters will always get an absentee ballot for each election until they stop returning it. So if you miss an election, you're going to have to let your clerk know you want to continue receiving those ballots, or else you will not continue to get them for future elections. The other thing about indefinitely confined voters is they are not required to provide a photo ID when they request their absentee ballot. The law recognizes that for some people, it's difficult to get a photo ID because of the barriers they have to getting to the Department of Motor Vehicles. So they prove their identity in a different way. They provide proof of residence when registering to vote, and the witness also confirms the voter's identity. If an indefinitely confined voter, something changes with their status and they decide they want to vote in person, then the same law applies to them as to any other voter. They need to provide that photo ID. Finally, it's up to the voter to determine if they are indefinitely confined, and that was affirmed by our state Supreme Court. This is not a medical diagnosis. You know, a doctor doesn't do a blood test and determine that someone is indefinitely confined. And that sounds a little sarcastic. It's because this has been a status that has sometimes been questioned. And I think that there's not always an understanding of how important it is to protect and continue this status. It's really important for many voters with disabilities and older adults. So any questions about the indefinitely confined voter status? Okay, this is something where we saw a lot of legislation this year that attempted to change the status in a way that would really have limited the benefit of it. So we have continued to advocate for the importance of maintaining this status. All right, gonna keep going here. So you've heard me talk a few times about if you vote absentee, you need to have a witness. And that's something that is often confusing to people. That what is this witness supposed to do? Well, they're supposed to verify that you complete the absentee ballot. So for example, my husband is my witness when I vote absentee, and I'm his witness. So we sit across the table from each other. We each have our ballots out. So I can see he's filling out his ballot. He sees I'm filling out mine, but the witness isn't supposed to see who you are voting for. That doesn't mean, you know, if you want to tell them, you can, but voting is a private matter and they're not required to see who you vote for, just to see that you are completing your ballot. And the witness signs the envelope. You can see the little picture we have here with the finger pointing to where the witness signs. This is really important and has become very contentious in Wisconsin. You must have your witness sign, and the voter must sign as well. And you must have the address of the witness, the full address. The instructions you receive, again, with your absentee ballot, we'll discuss this. In my community, the clerk specifically says, if the address does not include a zip code, then your vote won't be counted. So it varies a little bit, but if you want to be on the safe side, put in that full address or tell your witness to do so. In addition, if you have someone who is assisting you with completing your ballot, and you're allowed to do that as a voter with a disability, you might have difficulty writing because of your disability. The assistant needs to sign and date the certificate on the return envelope for the assister. And there's also a certificate on the ballot for the assister to sign. So who can you get to sign as your witness? It just needs to be a US citizen over the age of 18. That's the only requirement. Can be a friend, a spouse, a neighbor, a family member, a care worker. Sometimes people have trouble finding a witness, and communities may offer a drop-off location and have staff to witness your ballot. Again, the key thing is that you don't want to complete your ballot before you have the witness available, because they're supposed to watch you complete the ballot. If you're having trouble finding a witness, give your clerk a call. They may tell you to come over to your village hall or city hall, and that they can provide a witness for you. Sometimes we get calls at the disability voter hotline with people who need a witness, and sometimes we can assist too, but not always. So we have a few updates on absentee voting here. The first one, carefully follow those instructions for completing your absentee ballot and certificate envelope. I already mentioned this, but I'm mentioning it again. Cannot be too careful. Make sure your witness signs their name and their complete address. They're fighting in the courts in Wisconsin over what an address must include. So I suggest to people, play it safe, put the street number, street name, the municipality, the state, and the zip code. In the past, if information was missing, clerks were allowed to complete that. But there has now been a court ruling that clerks cannot complete missing information. They can call you up and let you know your witness didn't put in the state or the zip code or whatever was missing, but there might not be time to get that taken care of before the election. Another important change, drop boxes. I don't know if any of you used drop boxes in the past. I know that I found it a really helpful thing because I work long hours. I like being able to go on the weekend and drop off my ballot in a secure drop box, but the courts have ruled that those are not allowed any longer. And finally, a reminder, and this hasn't changed, but your clerk has to have your ballot by 8 p.m. on election day for your vote to count. And the location for returning your absentee ballot can vary by municipality. If it's too late to mail your ballot, check with your clerk and find out where the best place is to return your ballot. And we've got a link here that shows you where to get contact information for your clerk. So I am gonna turn it over to Martha now, who I am really fortunate to have as a colleague at Disability Rights Wisconsin. And Martha also played a lead role in some important advocacy for this election. So Martha, you want to talk a little bit about the right to assistance?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Martha Chambers, and as Barbara said, I've been helping with some voting rights advocacy since April, which I've been thrilled to do and happy to be a voice for others. On this particular slide, it's all about the right to assistance for voters with a disability, as I am one of those individuals unable to place my ballot in a mailbox. However, because I do have that right for assistance with any part of the voting process, the right is protected by federal law, which is a good thing. And also in Wisconsin, on August 31st, the court ordered in the case between Kerry versus Wisconsin Election Commission case, they clarified that voters with a disability may request assistance with mailing or delivering their ballot from anyone who is not their employer or a representative of a labor union. So you could ask a loved one, a caregiver, your neighbor, anyone you choose to assist you, or in my case, a caregiver, to help me so that I can get my ballot in a mailbox or delivered to a clerk. I can fill out my own ballot, but I can't place it in a mailbox. So I need that assistance. And then the last thing is voters who do not have a disability cannot have assistance in delivering their ballot. So someone who is not disabled would have to either get their ballot in the mail on time, or they would have to actually physically on their own take it to a voting on the day of voting in person. I get all that right. I think I got everything.
I think you did. Thanks, Martha. And Martha was actually one of the 4 voters in this lawsuit, Terry V. Weck, and I just want to highlight how important that advocacy was, because it's made a difference in reminding Wisconsin, you have to follow the law. This is federal law. It protects the rights of people with disabilities to have assistance, and grateful that Law Forward and the 4 voters in this case got a very good court order from Judge Peterson. I'm going to talk just a little bit more about that. So if you are a voter who asks someone to provide you with assistance to return your ballot, and the kind of scenario where this might come up with is if you are, it's a week away from the election. You just got your absentee ballot, you need to get it back in, but you don't want to send it by mail. Well, if you don't have a disability, you can't have someone else assist you. You can't have your neighbor or your caregiver or your sister take it over to the clerk. If you're a voter with a disability, you can ask a person of your choice, as long as they're not your employer or their union representative. But you want to let them know that when they return that ballot, the clerk is allowed to ask them a few questions. So on this slide, we've got the list of questions that were suggested by the Election Commission. Are you the voter? And if the person says, no, I'm not the voter, then they'll ask them, are you delivering the voter's ballot because the voter determined that they require assistance returning their ballot due to their disability? And if they say no, then they're going to say, nope, I'm sorry, we can't take the ballot. The voter has to return it. But if they say yes, the voter has a disability, then they're going to ask one more question. Are you someone other than the voter's employer, agent of the employer, or an officer or agent of the voter's union? So if you're not the employer or the union representative, the assister would say, yes, I'm someone other than that, then the ballot can be accepted. The other thing we're advising people is that the voter and assister should not have to fill out any forms or provide proof of disability. So people should know about that. We have 1,850 clerks in Wisconsin, and sometimes they do things differently. They should not be asking you to certify that you are to fill out a form or to provide some documentation that you're doing this for a voter with disability. They can ask you these questions. So just wanted to make that guidance very clear. We provided a few resources about this ballot return assistance policy, because we're finding a lot of people are confused about it because the law keeps changing. It's been different for every election this year. So we have a link to the Elections Commission guidance, some guidance from my agency, Disability Rights Wisconsin. And of course, you can feel free to call us at the hotline, 844-347-8683, and we're available year round. So I'm going to just pause again for a minute to see, we're going to move on to voting in person now. Any questions about absentee voting or about the new policies before we go on? All right. We've got a good group here. You guys are on top of things. So just want to make sure that if there are questions that we give you an opportunity to ask them. All right, we will move on now to voting in person. I'm just gonna share my screen again. All right, so just a few tips for voting in person. Always good to be prepared so that you get in there and get out pretty quickly. So first and foremost, check your polling place. It may have changed. The polling place you've gone to for years might not be your polling place in this election. So again, My Vote Wisconsin is your one-stop shop. You can look there to see your polling place. If you don't have access to do that, you can check with your clerk, give them a call, or feel free to call our hotline and we can help you with that. Another cool thing about My Vote is you can preview your ballot. You can see exactly what will be on your ballot when you go to your polling place. Again, that helps you to be a prepared voter. Check your voter registration. I often find that people tell me, oh yeah, I'm registered to vote, but it turns out the last time they voted was 4 years ago, and they are no longer have current status as a registered voter. So that means that you've got to make sure that you're prepared to register to vote when you go to your polling place on election day. If your driver's license or photo ID doesn't have your current address, you need to bring some other proof of residence document. So do your homework, check it out in advance. Early voting, that's really popular. Many communities allow people to vote early, and it varies depending on where you live, like so much in Wisconsin. So check with your clerk. I believe the earliest day for early voting is October 25th. So that's coming up quickly. Know your rights. If you are a person with a disability, your polling place should be accessible and you should be able to enter it without assistance. Yes, Jim, I see you have a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was make sure I'm not on mute. Okay, I'm not. I was just going to ask, if you vote early, like I've seen that in libraries, for example, if you vote early, are the machines available then, or just the standard fill stuff out kind of voting?
Oh, I'm really glad you asked that. That is a great question. So I think Jim is wondering if you vote early, will an accessible voting machine be available at your polling place? And again, like so much, the answer is it depends. So the law does not require that accessible voting machines be available at early voting locations. So municipalities are not required to do this. It is encouraged as a best practice. And I know in Madison and in Milwaukee, for example, typically they are available. I would also say that Wisconsin has a variety of accessible voting machines around the state. There are 8 or 9 different models. And there are some models that do not easily lend themselves to being set up for early voting because they need to be connected to the tabulator and they have some other limitations. So I have talked with the Election Commission about this. They did a little bit of research because they weren't really sure initially, but they did get back to me and let me know that there are some models that would not be possible for them to be set up for early voting. So check with your clerk. Good question, Jim. All right, we will go back to walking through the voting in person. So know your rights. We're going to talk about those in a minute. We actually have a great video that we recommend that you watch in advance if you're voting in person that does go over your rights. Curbside voting, that is one of the rights. So although polling places are supposed to be accessible, not all of them are. And even if they are accessible, some voters may still have difficulty entering their polling place because of disability or age. So if that is the case, your polling place is supposed to offer curbside voting. With curbside voting, You can stay outside the polling place in your car if you've come in a car or on the sidewalk. If you've walked over, come over in a scooter or wheelchair. And the 2 poll workers should bring the ballot out to you for you to cast your ballot curbside. What we recommend to people is call ahead, check with your clerk, let them know you need curbside voting and find out what the procedure is to access it. At some polling places, they want you to call when you arrive. Sometimes they want you to ring a bell or honk the horn. And sometimes there isn't really any signage or information provided, which is unfortunate, and it can be confusing for people. So plan ahead. Transportation. This is a big barrier for a lot of people. We always get calls leading up to election day. You know, I want to vote. I don't have transportation. Can you tell me if anything's available in my county? And at the Disability Vote Coalition, we do put together a list of transportation providers. We call it Ride to the Polls. And right now we are updating that information for the November 8th election, and it should be up by the end of the week. So check our website, and if your county has a service provider, make sure that they know to give us that information. We have a little survey for them to fill out, and we're still able to add service providers. We want to be as comprehensive as possible. So while we don't provide transportation, we help connect people with transportation, and we're always especially interested in accessible transportation because that is really in short supply. And then finally, of course, bring your photo ID. You got to have that. That's a requirement for voting in Wisconsin. If you do have questions, problems, or complaints on election day, give us a call at the hotline and we will be ready to provide assistance. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the common questions that we get from voters and from other groups that support people with voting. So one area where there's a lot of confusion, in fact, I just got a call today, has to do with supporting people under guardianship and understanding their voting rights. So in Wisconsin, if a person is under guardianship, they retain the right to vote unless the court expressly takes away that right. So the default in a guardianship is you keep that right. I got a call today from a family member of someone who had lost the right to vote and they would like to get it back. So the good news is there is a process to do that. You can petition the court to get your right to vote restored. And we've got some great new information on the Disability Rights Wisconsin website that walks people through that process. So if you're under guardianship or you help to support people who are, they want to better understand if they have the right to vote, please check out those resources, give us a call. We're happy to help. One final point, very important for people to understand that incompetency for voting purposes, that's a decision that only a court can make. Family members, doctors, or service providers, they may not determine that a person is incompetent to vote and try to take that right away from them. Only the court can make that decision. Here's another frequent scenario. Unfortunately, a lot of people with mental health needs or other disabilities experience challenges with housing. And they may be homeless for a period of time and not have a permanent address. They're still able to vote in Wisconsin, and we've got some guidance on what that process is. You can get a letter from a shelter or another community organization that you can use their address as your residence when registering to vote. You could use a park bench as your residence, but you would need to have that in a letter from a shelter or some other provider. In Milwaukee County, I understand that some people use the COGS building, which is our human services building for the county, is their address. So there's some additional guidance on the Election Commission website, and feel free to call us as well. Okay, Here's another scenario we hear a lot. I live in a nursing home. How do I vote? Well, people who live in a nursing home have the same right to vote as anyone else, unless they've lost that right. Simply because they live in a nursing home doesn't mean that they have lost the right to vote. Voting actually is a resident rights issue. And CMS, the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services, actually says that nursing rights must have a plan to ensure that residents can exercise their right to vote, whether in person, by mail, absentee, or in some other way. In Wisconsin, we have a special program called Special Voting Deputies, and they go to nursing homes to conduct absentee voting. They are supposed to visit a facility twice to conduct in-person voting. And during the time that SVDs are visiting, if someone has an absentee ballot request on file, the absentee ballot will not be mailed to them. If they don't want to vote with an SVD or they miss those visits, the ballot will not be sent to them until after the special voting deputies have visited twice. Special voting deputies are not necessarily able to help with voter registration. To me, that's a real gap in the program, but that's the way it is. And for that reason, it's very important for people who live in a nursing home who wish to vote to plan ahead. When you first move to a facility, think about whether you want to vote at your old address, which you can continue to do if you wish, or if you want to vote at the address of the nursing home, and make sure that your voter registration is updated. Make sure also that you have an absentee ballot on file. And we try and do some training for service providers to make sure that they understand the importance of supporting the residents' rights to vote. There's a manual here that the Election Commission has on this topic. Living at a psychiatric facility, when Mendota or Winnebago, for example, are two state psychiatric facilities. So there's some additional guidance that we've provided for voters in those facilities. So if someone is already a registered voter, they can request an absentee ballot. They could choose to certify as an indefinitely confined voter. If you're living at a psychiatric facility, you would meet that criteria. Your address for voting, however, this is different than a nursing home. It is your last home address, not the address of the facility. And that's based on the way in which state law is interpreted. So you need to provide, if you are not currently registered, you would need to register and have proof of address that includes your name and your voting address. Again, that's where something like an intake document from the facility can be helpful, because that would have your name and your last residential address. So that's a quick heads up about voting in a psychiatric facility. Criminal conviction. I mentioned this a little bit before. Often people who have a criminal conviction are fearful about voting. They're not sure if they have the right to vote. They don't want to get in trouble. And, you know, for us, this is a disability rights issue because many people in our jails and prisons have a mental illness or other disability. And we want to make sure that they understand their voting rights. So if you've been convicted of a misdemeanor, except for treason or bribery, you retain the right to vote, even if you're in jail or prison. And jails and prisons can support their residents with voting, and some do, but not all of them do. League of Women Voters has a really great effort to support jail-based voting, and we have partnered with them on that. In addition, if you are convicted of a felony, treason, or bribery, in that case, in Wisconsin, you lose the right to vote until you have completely finished your sentence. And that means you're off paper, you've finished probation and parole. We often find people aren't sure of their status. So if in doubt, we recommend people call the Wisconsin Election Commission voter helpline, and they can help you check to see if your right to vote has been restored. We also did a training for over 1,000 Department of Correction, community correction staff to give them information so that they could help advise people in their care about their voting rights. And we've got a link to the toolkit that we developed with the League of Women Voters. So how to learn about the candidates, that's a challenge for all of us. You know, those commercials don't really do it for a lot of us. So we have a few suggestions here: watching candidate forums and interviews, news coverage, nonpartisan sources of information. The League has a wonderful resource called vote411.org. I really rely on that to help me make decisions about candidates. We also, on our website, have questions that you can share with the candidates. So if there's a candidate forum in your community, or if there's a radio call-in opportunity, we encourage you to challenge the candidates and ask some questions about the issues that are important to you. So I'm going to turn it back over to Martha now to talk a little bit about rights for voters with a disability. So thanks, Martha.
You're welcome. Here are one of my key rights as a voter with a disability. I have a right to vote privately and independently, which means, as Barbara indicated a few slides back, that as I vote and fill out my ballot, I can do it without someone leaning over me and seeing who I'm voting for and having an opinion as to who I'm voting for and why. I have the right to do that privately. Right to access the polling place. My polling place, if I would choose to go in person, the right to be able to get to it, to be able to get into it, and have it accessible for me as a person with a disability. The right to use the accessible voting machine at my polling place. It should be available for me to use at a space where I don't have to ask them to pull it out or to move it around, but it should be available so that I can move up to it and use it as I would as a person with a disability. The right to ask for accommodations, such as a chair to sit in rather than standing in line if I would need that, a signature guide, magnifying glass, assistance stating your name and address. That would need someone else to assist me to do those things if I needed clarification. And then the last one, right to assistance, marking, mailing, or returning my ballot, just not my employer or a union representative could not do those things. And that's that one. Okay. And then the next one, hold on 1 second so I can see it a little better. Okay. Sorry about that. A little slow. And then the next slide, more rights, the right to curbside voting. If you can't get into your polling place as a result of a disability, you have your right to use the curbside voting option. And Barbara indicated earlier that there may be a bell to ring. Someone may walk out and greet you by your vehicle. And there may be other ways that you have the ability to use curbside voting so that you have that option. You can file a complaint if you feel your rights have been violated during the voting process. If you make a mistake, you can request another ballot from the election officials. And you may bring a note sheet into the polling place that may assist you in who you choose to vote for, so that you make sure that you make the best decisions as to who are the best candidates for you, and that no one should ever tell you how to vote. You should be able to vote for who you want to vote for. Any questions?
Yeah,
Thank
thank you
you.
so much, Martha, for going over those rights. And those are really important. And just one that I'll say another word about is that right to file a complaint. And that's really important. I'll just give you an example. I used to vote in person, and when I went to my polling place, the accessible voting machine did not work. And none of the poll workers had been trained on it. They didn't even know that it existed. And each time I would go and I would encounter a problem. And so after having that happen several times, I did file a complaint with the Wisconsin Elections Commission because that just wasn't acceptable. And I wanted to make sure that other people had a working accessible voting machine so that that was available. So when you file a complaint, even though you might have resolved an issue for yourself, it can be helping other voters. So consider doing that if you run into a problem, which we hope you won't. Most voters have a pretty good experience. You know, we are a complaint-driven agency at Disability Rights Wisconsin. People don't call us up and say, hey, my polling place was accessible and everyone was really helpful and I had a great experience. We hear from the people who are having problems, and we hope that that won't be you. But we hope that this training today gave you some good tips. And our PowerPoint, which we'll send to you after the fact, also has a list of phone numbers and websites that we hope will be helpful to you. So feel free to share any final comments, questions. Did anything you heard today surprise you? Any new information for you? Jim, go for it.
Well, no, there's no new information, but I was just wanting to emphasize to people because I didn't feel like it, I don't know, and maybe I didn't hear it, didn't come up enough. Those accessible voting machines, they're just voting machines. I mean, they're accessible, very accessible, because I've used them, a lot of different kinds of disabilities, and they're very clear to use. But you can use them, anybody can use them. It's not a disabilities only kind of thing. It just so happens that they're accessible, and so we call them that, but it means a very accurate measure of what you're voting for. And so I really like that.
Yeah, thank you for making that point, Jim. In fact, it's actually helpful if other voters ask to use the accessible voting machine for a lot of different reasons. First of all, it gives it more visibility, and it gives the poll workers a little bit of an opportunity to make sure that they're on top of things. And in some cases, with some models, the express vote, the ballot actually looks different on the express vote than on other voting equipment at the polling place. So if other voters vote on the express vote, that's helpful because it protects the privacy of those voters with disabilities who use it. Well, we've really enjoyed the opportunity to have a conversation with you today about the November 8th election. Are any of you going to go out and try and encourage other folks to vote? Our whole theme today is rev up the disability vote. So can we count on you to do that?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Good to hear. Well, we have a ton of resources on disabilityvote.org, and the good news is they're all free. So whether you want a fact sheet or you want voting buttons or wristbands, or you want posters, postcards, we've got a great array of resources, and we would love to share them with you and your organizations. So give us a call. Oh, I see that Jennifer mentioned they have a huge Halloween display, and they'll be talking to people about this information as they stop by. Thank you very much, Jennifer. That's great to hear. If anyone else is doing creative things, feel free to share them in the chat. Well, we've really enjoyed the conversation today. I want to thank Martha for teaming up with me. It's always a pleasure. And Jim, thanks for your work, getting the word out and reaching out to the community and all of your advocacy to protect voting rights in our state. And we welcome the opportunity to talk with you today, and give us a call at the DRW Voter Hotline if you have any question. Thanks, everyone. I'll stick around for a few minutes in case there are any questions.
Sounds
Thank
good. I
you.
just want to say thanks to Martha and Barbara for doing that for us. It was really helpful, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. You betcha. And we will stop recording and we will